Picture this. A mysterious black door appears in the middle of a forest, literally overnight. No one knows where it came from. Curious, a young boy steps forward and opens it. Inside, there's a glowing blue tunnel. He walks through and suddenly finds himself in a beautiful world made entirely of floating islands and golden skies. Then, a voice echoes around him. Choose one wish. The boy wishes for his sick mother to be healthy again. In an absolute instant, he's back in the forest. When he runs home, his mother is smiling, completely healthy. But the next morning, the door has vanished. On the ground lies a small golden key, and attached to it is a note that reads, "The door will return when the world needs a hero." Well, welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive deep into the fascinating mechanics and the psychology behind portal fantasy journeys just like this one.
So, imagine stepping out of your ordinary life and into the complete unknown. It's a fantasy we've literally all had at some point, right? Finding a secret doorway that leads somewhere completely extraordinary. Today, we are breaking down exactly how authors construct this experience. We're going to look at everything from the shape of the doorway itself to the profound and honestly sometimes devastating psychological toll it takes on the traveler. Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. Defining portal fantasy. 2. Mechanisms of the gateway. 3. The eerie liminal space. 4. The hero's journey monomyth. 5. When fallen heroes fail. And finally, 6. Life after the magic. Okay, Section 1. Defining portal fantasy, escaping to secondary worlds. Let's start by establishing exactly what we mean when we talk about escaping into these magical realms. Portal fantasy is a very specific subgenre of speculative fiction. The absolutely crucial point to understand here is that these stories, the ones popularized by early classics like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, they use portals as catalysts for immense world building. They aren't just about getting a character from point A to point B. No, they're about throwing a character into a completely new reality, one that is governed by entirely different laws of nature, magic, and logic. The brilliant scholar Farah Mendelssohn actually frames it perfectly. It's not just a physical door. It's a rigid boundary between realities. It's a threshold that rips characters out of their comfort zones and basically demands that they explore, adapt, and ultimately transform. Moving right along to Section 2, Mechanisms of the Gateway, the rules of interdimensional travel. So, how exactly do you get to these secondary worlds? Well, portals can take incredibly varied forms. We've got the classic physical structures like doors and that famous wardrobe in Narnia. We've got reflective surfaces like Alice's Looking Glass. But then we also have weather events like the Whirlwind in The Wizard of Oz, or deep sci-fi concepts like wormholes. And get this, they can even be portable. In Aaron Morgenstern's fantastic novel, The Starless Sea, the gateway to an underground magical library is actually accessed through mysterious books. How cool is that? Now, what's really fascinating here is the contrast between organic and artificial gateways. Natural portals, like a weird cave or a sudden whirlwind, they are wild and unpredictable. You never really know when they're going to open or where they're going to dump you. But on the flip side, technological portals, the ones built with science, like a Stargate, they are highly prone to malfunctioning. And when they do, it often results in some pretty terrifying consequences for the traveler's sanity or even their physical form. Which brings us to Section 3, the eerie liminal space, the uncanny in-between. Because, sometimes the portal doesn't actually take you to a magical kingdom. Sometimes it traps you right in the middle. According to research in environmental psychology, spaces of transition can fall into what's known as an uncanny valley of architecture. Cultural theorist Mark Fisher calls this a failure of presence. Think about it for a second. Have you ever walked through a schoolhouse or a long hotel hallway late at night? It feels horrifyingly eerie when it lacks the living humans we normally expect to be there. It's a space meant for transitioning, not for staying. So when it's totally empty, our brains just scream that something is deeply, deeply wrong. You have probably noticed this whole internet aesthetic blowing up in pop culture lately. These transitional spaces strip away context and trap the traveler in a surreal, uncanny valley. The Backrooms is a perfect example of this. It's this famous online creepypasta about an endless maze of damp, mono-yellow office carpets and buzzing fluorescent lights. Just awful. We also see this eerie emptiness used brilliantly in video games like The Stanley Parable and hit shows like Apple TV's Severance. It's literally the horror of being stuck in the doorway itself. All right, Section 4, the hero's journey monomyth, mapping the monomyth. Once the traveler actually successfully enters the new world, they almost always follow a very specific underlying skeleton. We're talking about Joseph Campbell's foundational monomyth. This concept structures the narrative into three rigid phases. First, you have the departure, where the hero leaves their normal world behind. Second is the initiation, where they face intense trials, gain knowledge, and usually confront some sort of supreme power. And finally, the return, where they have to bring that hard-earned knowledge back home to their primary world. This psychological blueprint is absolutely crucial. It's what turns a mere tourist into a fully transformed hero by the end of their ordeal. It's a framework deeply rooted in ancient human rites of passage, which perfectly explains why a story written today can feel just as powerful and resonant as a myth from classical antiquity. Simply put, the hero must change in order to survive the secondary world. But Section 5, When Fallen Heroes Fail, Defeated by the Journey, asks a darker question. What happens when the traveler actually fails this psychological process? Let's take a look at the tragic subversion of the monomyth. When we look really closely at literary history, we find characters like John Milton's Satan in the 17th century epic Paradise Lost, and Stephen King's Roland Deschain from the contemporary dark fantasy series The Dark Tower. Academics use them as the ultimate case studies in heroic failure. They start the monomyth off perfectly, but then they entirely break the pattern. So check this out. Both characters successfully complete the departure and initiation phases, but they completely and utterly fail the crucial return phase of Campbell's monomyth. Satan flat out refuses to accept his subordinate place to God, and because of that, he's permanently locked out of a return to heaven. Roland, on the other hand, becomes so ruthlessly obsessed with reaching his goal that he sacrifices his friends and honestly his own humanity along the way. Because these characters fail to accept their limitations, their victories actually become their punishments. Take Satan's tragic realization, which way I fly is hell, myself am hell. He realizes he cannot escape his own nature, which cements his status as a permanently defeated hero. He traveled to a whole new realm, sure, but he brought his own personal torment right along with him. It's a very similar story for Roland. When he finally reaches the top of the Dark Tower, he isn't rewarded with some grand knowledge to bring back to his world. Nope. Instead, his ultimate punishment is being thrust right back to the very opening line of his story. He is doomed to repeat his harrowing journey all over again, completely without his memories. It is an incredibly chilling subversion of the classic Portal quest. And that brings us to our final stop, Section 6, Life After the Magic, the Trauma of the Return. We really have to look at the heavy psychological toll placed on the travelers who actually do manage to make it back home. A lot of modern authors are asking the hard question. How on earth can a person possibly cope with a mundane, everyday life after living out a grand, fantastical destiny? Just look at Shauna Maguire's Wayward Children series. It's entirely about a boarding school for kids who were kicked out of their magical portal worlds and are now suffering from severe literal withdrawals. Or Laurie E. Weymouth's The Light Between Worlds, which deals with immense grief and depression as characters try to survive the grim reality of World War II London after living as royalty in a magical forest. And of course, there's Love Grossman's The Magicians, which basically injects brutal adult reality straight into the whimsical tropes of Narnia. What we are seeing here is a major literary shift. Classical portals built by authors like C.S. Lewis were mostly about innocence, morality, and to be honest, they often carried underlying tones of colonial conquest. Civilized children marching in to save a savage, magical land. But modern deconstructions by authors like Alex E. Harrow in The 10,000 Doors of January or Stephen R. Donaldson, they tear these tropes down and rebuild them. They introduce complex post-colonial perspectives, serious moral ambiguity, and they actually acknowledge the lasting, deep psychological scars that would come from crossing dimensions. So I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Perhaps the true test of the hero's journey isn't actually surviving the magical realm. Maybe it's surviving the mundane reality that inevitably follows. Think back to the boy in our opening story, the one who stepped through the glowing blue tunnel to heal his mother. The magic didn't last forever. The door vanished. It leaves you forever changed, standing there holding a golden key in a totally ordinary world, just waiting for the magic to return. Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer, and we will see you next time.